All right, guys, we are here with the last seminar for today. Again, we'll be doing more of these. Good lineup again. Some of the same tomorrow, but doors will open at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning and closes at 5. Guys, do not miss this. If you're in our area, you've got to get over here to the venue. This is a great show. So heard nothing but great feedback. All right, we're going to talk fly fishing here for just a few minutes. So hope you enjoy. If you got any questions, then drop them in the comments.
Welcome, everybody, to the Saturday edition here in Alabama, the Alabama Fishing Show and Expo, first year for it. Glad everybody came out. Hope you had a great day here at the show. I'm Mike Willis. I host all the seminars and do a few occasionally, too. Frank Roden and I met each other last year at the East Tennessee Fishing Show, and he informed me that Gadsden, Alabama had quite the population of trout, which I did not know, coming here bass fishing all these years that I did. And he did some great seminars in East Tennessee, and now he's going to do a great one for you guys here, right here in Gadsden, Alabama. Mr. Frank Roden.
Thank you, Mike. Guys, I'd like to welcome you to Gadsden, the City of Champions. And we definitely have trout here, but we're going to look at this in a manner that it just doesn't pertain to trout alone. We should be able to take a look at this. Give me just a second, folks. Okay. Said, welcome to the City of Gadsden. I hope everybody's enjoying the fishing show. And Chuck, I'm not sure what's going on with this picture. It's jumping around everywhere. But we're going to enjoy the show anyway. We're going to make it work. We're going to talk about spotting trout, stalking trout. This is as much as a hunt as it is fishing. How many of you deer hunted? You've learned to look through the woods, not at the woods, in order to see the deer. The same thing's going to pertain to the water. Not only does it pertain to fly fishing, it worked for our conventional fishing also. But stalking trout waters, what are we looking for and where are we looking? That's two of the front-up questions we're going to answer. What are we looking for in that water? Of course, we're looking for fish, but what are we trying to see in order to know that we found the fish? And then where are we going to look? You've got small trout waters, smaller streams, that allows us a lot of activity where we can get up on boulders, we can get in the shade. We can see a lot of fish here. And as we look a little further, I'm going to show you what we're looking for in those. Bigger water, it's a little more difficult to catch them in the rough water or to see them in the rough water than it is the slick water like up here near the shoreline. And of course, one of my favorites for spotting trout, stalking these fish, is pocket waters, plunge pools. When you get on these, there could be a spot the size of your hat that'll hold a trophy fish. A lot of people will pass these up. They're not looking to where these fish normally hold. Many trips start out with, if I take a client on the water, I ask them, are we wanting to catch fish or are we wanting to learn to catch fish? Well, we want to learn to spot them, or are you just about the fish count? 90% says, Frank, I just want a good picture. I want a good picture of a fish when I leave here. Well, where does that throw me? we get out there and we find some good fish. They get hooked up, and that fish takes downstream. And in a few minutes, it's running back upstream by me. I got a 6-foot fellow standing here in front of me, and if it's make a second pass each way, it's up here in some laurels up above him. He's 6 foot tall. I'm looking over his head, and that fish jumps through the limbs of these trees or bushes, and he's hollering, "Net him, Frank, net him." Well, now he's put the challenge on me. I definitely can't get around on the other side of a 6-foot fella and pull his fish out of a tree, but if he can keep him on, normally it ends up he's in, I don't run, 6 to 8 feet deep water. Now, a 5'3" man out there in 6 foot of water, netting a fish can be a real challenge. It can be done, and I've spent mornings where we got it done. We got great pictures. I went back to the truck and changed clothes and never got warm all day, and he's just thrilled to death at that 23, 24-inch trout that he got a picture of earlier. It would have been a lot easier if he had to learn step by step how to stalk his fish, where we're going to cast, what they're eating, where we're going to cast, where we need to position ourselves, and how he's going to handle it once it gets on. If I work this with you and teaching you how, when you get ready to net that fish, I'm going to be standing in the edge of the water with a net, and you're going to have to hit the toes of my boots with that trout. You're going to put him in the net right at the toes of my boots instead of me getting in that 6-foot water. It's went both ways, and I promise you it's cold. When we arrive on the stream, most of my friends are in a rush to get their rods together before anyone else does. They want to get on that first spot first. They want to catch that first fish before everybody else does. I prefer to take my time, walk the banks, stalk these fish. And once I find the fish, it's going to make the whole day go easier. Stalking the fish or fly fishing is it's more than just casting a fly out and hoping for a fish to run up there and take that fly and run off with it. Let's walk the bank and remember that if we find fish early in our trip, it's already a success. What's going to help us see these fish? Polarized glasses. If you take a set of polarized glasses, I used to be a sworn member of the Ray-Ban group. As a pilot, I didn't think there was any other sunglasses but Ray-Ban. I'm standing on the side of the stream, and a lady says, "You see those fish?" I think she's jerking me around, and I'm saying, "What fish?" She reaches over and rips those Ray-Bans off of me and puts those particular little ladylike glasses on my face. She said, "See them?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I do." So at that point, I learned to go with polarized lenses. My lenses on a trout stream, I prefer a brown to an amber color lens. And that will help you not only in spotting fish, but in waiting. When you see what you're putting those feet on, it's going to help you stay upright. Have anybody here ever been a water buffalo? A water buffalo is where you stand in that stream and you step on a spot that you think is secure, and you move your other foot, and next thing you know, your feet are headed downstream, so legs and waders inflated, and you're floating downstream waiting on the next shallow spot. As you go by your buddy, somebody's probably going to scream out, "Water buffalo!" And everybody's going to have a tale to tell when they get home about you and you falling. Tammy, my wife, is here today with us on her first trout fishing expedition. I give her my wading staff. get under one arm. We walk out there and we get her positioned in a good spot. I go on across the stream, and prior to getting across that stream, I see a fish and I cast, immediately hooked up. As I hooked up, I looked over my shoulder and hear her giggling. She'd never caught a trout before. She's got one on, so I'm trying to maneuver my fish across the stream, get over to her and help net it. I lost my footing. Here I go downstream and holding that rod up, trying to keep from getting tangled up. And as I go by her, she says, "I got it." You know, I have to learn that she can do well without me. She's a good trout fisherman. However, when she sees this brown curvy-like stick coming down the water, try not to point out to her. Because I helped her out that day, taking her out under one elbow and her with the wading staff. But I seen it, and she asked me what it was, and I told her, and I turned around and looked, she's standing back up on the bank. She didn't need no help. So, as we look at that, blend your clothing with background. Keep a low profile, which is much easier for me than just some of you guys. And as we do, we want to move slowly. As you're stalking, what do we need to do with that fly rod? Everybody in this room probably already knows this, but that rod needs to be pointed behind you. Let's not break that rod. It needs to be parallel to the surface of the ground or to the water. Third thing, a number of people will lose when they're stalking. They'll lose a rod tip, never to find it again. If you will put the line and leader through that rod and put a fly on and attach it to your hook keeper, if that rod tip starts to come off while you're stalking and it in a tree limb, you're going to feel that tug and you're going to know what's going on. You're not going to lose it. It might take an extra minute to undo it, but you're not going to lose that rod tip and send a, $90 rod fee in for a warranty to get a rod tip back. So let's keep that thing parallel, but let's put a fly on. It's good to stand behind boulders and the vegetation. Hide when you can. Stay in the shadows and deep shades. I've tried to put all this on the screen where many of you, if you can hear me, you can see what I'm talking about. But the clothing, we talked about blending in with the background. Sky or vegetation are good things to blend into. Works well, the fish not going to see you as well, but there's another aspect of your clothing. How many of you have been through TSA in your fly fishing clothes? Well, here's what might happen to you. You're in Salt Lake City, Utah. Long line going up, and you get in that line, you say it's going to be a while. Man comes down the line, and he's checking IDs and passports. He gets to me, and there must be 40 people in front of me. He says, "Guy, you can step right over here to this short line if you want to." I thanked him. Man, he's doing me a favor, I thought. I got to that short line, and they looked at stuff and asked me where I'd been, where I was headed, and I give them the information. As I stepped through the metal detector, everything was smooth there. But one of the agents meets me on the other side of the metal detector. He says, "Follow me." We went in behind the screen, and this agent was a lady. We've sent for your bags. If you will, remove your clothing down to your shorts. Okay. So I stripped down to my shorts. I'm standing there, and I'm waiting for my baggage to come. And I stand up, and I started to reach for my trouser, my pants. And here was this fellow that looked like he weighed 300 pounds, puts those arms across each other and stands in front of me. And I said, "Hey, I just want my pants." Well, he didn't change expressions or anything. He just stood there like a rock. And I got my trousers and put them on. A few minutes, they got my bags there and they tore them apart. Everything going wrong that could. They didn't find anything they was interested in. I packed my bag back up and they sent it on its way. And I got dressed and they said, Mr. Roden, you're cleared to go. I left and I went to the ticket counter, or to the gate. And the man says, you're too late to board, we just finished boarding. The aircraft's still sitting there, I opened the door. No, that wasn't gonna happen. And I looked up, and within an hour, another aircraft was leaving for Birmingham, Alabama. No, sir, we won't swap your ticket. You're on a particular flight that's leaving in 6 hours. Your bag's already been routed that direction, and you're riding on the aircraft with your bag's on. Oh, okay. I'm unhappy. I sat down in front of him, and I guess I was trying to stare a hole through him. He walks out and he says, I've got a free pass for a tour to the temple. I ain't leaving this place. I ain't going through that check again. Okay. After that, I realized, heck, they didn't give my passport back and my driver's license. I had to head back to TSA. I got to TSA, and they found my identification. Notice the color of this shirt. All of us at Flyfish probably have several colors or shades of green fly fishing shirts. That's what I was wearing when I got my driver's license picture taken. That's the color of shirt or type of shirt I was wearing when I had my passport made. That's the color of my picture on my military ID. My hair hadn't changed in 40-something years. They said, I'm unhappy, and they said, Mr. Roden, got a minute? I guess I do. Well, they pulled me aside and explained to me. The same color shirt that all those IDs were in. Same haircut. And when they showed me the photos, they said, look in that mirror. And I looked in the mirror, and they said, you look like that picture was taken today. You know what I did on my next passport? I pulled out the roughest, ugliest farm shirt I had, and I had my passport made in it. You will no longer see my military ID. You won't see my driver's license and my passport matching each other, and none of them's going to be a green shirt. So, dressing for the stream and TSA and these trips mean a lot. Doesn't have a lot to do with stalking, but it has a lot to do with getting you there. We talked about what's going to help us see fish. Those polarized glasses we talked about, plus the underside of these hats and caps should be a dark shade to reduce reflections coming off the water. Once we're on that water and we start seeing insects, we need to be able to identify them. This should take place prior to going to the stream. You ought to get familiar with what's on those streams. Here we're looking at a caddis with a swept back, tit-shaped wing. And I'm going to point something out to you here in just a moment. But first, if you're not seeing dry flies, turn over some wet rocks. Look for the bugs on the bottom. If you're not familiar with those nymphs, hey guy, open that fly box up and get the closest thing you got to it. You know, if we don't know exactly what it is, try to pick something as close as you can get. And back to stalking the fish. Many times on slick water, the shade, the shadow under that fish, you can see it long before you can see the fish. So look for those dark shadows on the bottom and identify where that fish is. If you're seeing this fish, he's not the only one in that stream. start looking at ledges up under the vegetation, dark spots, any deep holes. I've had people walk by me on a shaded stream and I see as many fish as what you're seeing here. Hadn't counted them yet, but there's a number of fish in that photo. But if they're not slowing down, they'll pass that spot right up. Slow down and take a look at what you're looking at. Remember, stay low, fish like a predator. When you're wading and fishing, try not to step into prime spots for fish. A lot of fellows wade out there and they're getting that prime run or where the fish would hold. They do that prior to casting that first fly. Try not to do that. Think about the fish's senses. What's their field of vision? These trout, for instance, are going to be looking upstream. And their field of vision is right here. They're not turning around looking. They're steady upstream, and their vision's right here, okay? Not only is it out at this angle, it's at this angle. So the closer that gets, the closer it's got to be to the nose on that fish for him to take it. The fish's senses, the vision. Their trout are nearsighted. Their lenses in their eyes are different than ours. They'll see large images out here, and they'll come after that fly. But have you come up there, get close, and them turn them away and reject them? They must have just identified that that doesn't look exactly what they've been taking. Next thing is their hearing. Anybody see the ears on a trout? I'm seeing a lot of heads shake no. These fish have an inner ear. The membranes in the front portion of their body is where most of those signals come through those pores, being signaled to their inner ear in their brain. High frequency noises is what's working with that inner ear. You know, if you're slamming car doors, dropping a box on a bank, or shouting or something, high frequency. That's what you think about on their inner ear. Their sense of feel. Everybody knows what lateral lines are on fish. The lateral lines is where the low frequency picks up. You know, you run a boat up to a fish on the Coosa River and you push water, you just telegraphed where you was at, okay? That fish knows where you're at. He is already looking for danger above and around. Something's pushing water, and he knows it's not what he's used to. And then the sense of smell. Clint, I think we talked about this maybe yesterday. How many of you have fueled your vehicle en route to a trout stream? The number one scent rejected by a trout? Petroleum. If you get that scent off that pump handle even, and then you handle your flies in your fly box, and he comes up there right to it and just almost touches it and then just turns away, he probably just, hey, that guy fueled up this morning, okay? I fished with a lady on saltwater, or in a different boat, but was fishing on the same trip, and the fellows was wanting to handle her flies, and she wouldn't let anybody touch her flies in her fly box because of this. And she's a real successful fly fisherman, but she wouldn't let anybody touch the flies in her fly box for this very reason. So remember, let's be careful about what we handle prior to handling those flies. Okay, we mentioned that they was nearsighted, where their vision fields are. The closer they get to the fly, the better they can identify it. The inner ear, we talked about the pores and membranes on the front of the fish, going to the inner ear and signaling the brain. And then the lateral line picks up those low frequencies. And there again, that's, if you're wading, for instance, and you're wading upstream of this fish and you're pushing water, He knows where you're at. However, if you're wading just downstream, fishing over his shoulders, he's not feeling you because that water being pushed downstream with the current. So you're at an advantage there. Okay? Let's fish from over their shoulders. And of course, the sense of smell, we talked about that in the petroleum. And now we're going to get back to stalking, what originally started with. Most fish, the back or top of the fish matches closely with the bottom surface of the stream. If it's brown, green, if it's covered with grass, you're probably going to get a dark green back on the fish. But when I talk about fish colors, there's a second thing I'm going to talk about. Look at the inside of that mouth, what color it is, okay? Have you ever been on the stream and say, well, that fish is taking on top, but you put something on top and he's not touching it. Fish break the water when they take on top, and they break the water when they're feeding on the mergers, right in the film of that water. I know you know what I'm talking about. That merger comes up and it just hadn't quite broke its surface yet, okay? They'll break the water on that too, but what do you see on one that you don't the other? It's the white of that mouth. When that topwater fish comes up and opens that white mouth, dead on, you know what he's got. That's a dry fly. But if he comes up and you have to ask yourself a second time, did I see the inside of that mouth? He's on a merger, okay? A lot of merger feeding goes on, if you're familiar with mayflies, a lot of people see a hatch and they think it's when they've emerged and the wings come up high and they're flying off. But most of merger feeding's going on when that adult fly comes back to the water as a spinner with his wings laid out flat. You see that, you can almost count on them taking a lot of mergers in the water. So when you're matching that hatch, common things that you know about, size, silhouette, and color. That's just trying to match the fly. On non-hatch days, if you can't determine it by a rock, go to woolly buggers and your nymphs. If you try a few, you'll find what they're taking. Woolly bugger being the number one fly in the country as far as a wet fly and what they're taking. But I mentioned size, silhouette, and color, but how about behavior? How are you going to make that fly, whether it's a dry fly or a wet fly, mimic the behavior of what's going on the stream? One is a good free drift on that dry fly. Don't try to cast at it. On bass, we'll cast right at the fish, you know. But on trout, let's put it 10 to 12 feet above him on a dry fly and try to have that fly come right down there to him. If it's a wet fly, look where in the water column that fish is eating, and you're going to have to cast it further upstream in order for that fly to sink and get down to that fish's level by the time the fly gets to him. Identify your mayflies. High wings, notice that tail. We're back at the caddis now. Wings are not as high, they're that tent shape, but you don't see that tail on that caddis that you saw on that mayfly. So that's another good way to figure out what they're taking. Stoneflies, people talk to me about watching that stonefly emerge and flying off the water. Stoneflies don't fly off the water. They crawl to the bank, they crawl to structure, they get up on something, they dry out, and then they fly off. They don't fly directly off the water's surface. But there are people argue with you about that, but if you go to stream and watch it with them, they'll educate themselves. With grasshoppers, one of the easiest flies out there for me to match. I can take a big old foam fly that the bottom of it's about the size of what that grasshopper was or a cicada, and that foam fly will do a great job with this grasshopper. It doesn't have to be dead on. However, dragonflies, if you watch these dragonflies doing these S-turns over the top of the water, and you're looking for trout, and you've spotted those dragonflies, watch just behind these dragonflies, and they're swimming, the trout are swimming the same pattern. Even the smallmouth do it. The same pattern that dragonfly is. That dragonfly makes a 180 degrees turn. The reason you want to match it real close, when he makes that 180 degrees turn, that fish come out of the water and take that dragonfly out of the air. And how they can do that, keep up with that fly and then get him when he makes that 180 degrees, nature has taught that fish a lot. The ant patterns, pretty easy to see. There's a lot of ants on the water. But sometimes I can't see that ant pattern, and I put on water as good as I ought to, so a post helps out. Turn those rocks over. But here's what, let's get back to stalking. When I'm walking up this stream, and I'm looking and watching for these fish, sometimes I spot that shadow. Sometimes I'll spot a pot of fish. But other times it'll be something just come up and took. What is he going to do? A trout doesn't turn 180 degrees and run off. He will slide to the left or right of where he just took it, line, that feeding lane. Then he'll drift back feet or yards downstream. And I'm watching him, I want to get his timing. And then he'll move back over in that feeding lane. And somewhere in that process, a number of times, another fish took. Hey, I've got more than one fish in this orbit. Now, I'm trying to maintain eye contact with that first fish, get that timing down, and also identify what this fish is taking. But I've stalked him found him by seeing him take. Other times, it's a shadow I see, or a pot of fish. I see a crimson streak out there in the wrong place. I'll see what looks like the eye or tail fly fish. I won't see the whole fish. I'm seeing pieces of fish. And then I start putting it together. We see this, it all works well. On slick water, you can see fish much better than you can on moving or rough water. But how do we spot these on rough water? You can take and look at that water, and there'll be a slick spot, maybe the size of my hat, and it's drifting downstream with this rough water. If you look through that slick spot and keep your eyes on it to go downstream, it's amazing how many fish you can spot. It's like a looking glass and a magnifying glass all in one. So I look for this stuff for stalking trout. Everybody see that nymph right there that's in a circle? That'd be an easy one for you to go to your fly box and match up. These emergers I'm talking about are just breaking the water's surface. There's something that you need to key on when you don't see the white mouth of that fish. But I just passed up something I should have told you. Your buddy's on that stream, and he rushed in there, and he started casting, and then wanting to get to the first spots first. He catches a fish, steps back, and takes off upstream because he wants to beat you that next hole. He has just stalked those fish and told you where they're at. Trout have a pecking order. And this fish he just took out, if you give it 3 to 5 minutes and you'll slip up there to where he was, you start fishing right there, you'll have to catch 4 or 5 fish before you move on. He just told you where the fish was, and him trying to run off up there and beat you the next spot. It's actually give it away. So if your buddy's trying to outrun you upstream, just let him do it. Watch what's going on. He can take a lot of the hunt out of this stock by just showing you where these fish are. And it's a pecking order. And most of the time, the next best fish or the best fish left in that stream is going to move up in that fish's spot. He'll look back there and he'll say, I fished that spot for 15, 20 minutes. I caught one fish, and you come in behind me and catch 4 or 5. Yeah, that's what happened. I love caddis larvas. You'll see one natural fly on there, and you'll see a couple that's been tied up with those bead heads on it. You can get awful close to that pattern. And once they're wet, it really helps you. When we go to a stonefly now, it's real leggy, okay? Most of us look at the dark side of that fish, fly on the top side, and we're trying to match that. However, we need to be looking at the underside of that fly. As you see the pattern over to the right, it's a light color on the bottom, it's got a lot of legs. This stonefly has some tail to it back there. If you're tying that pattern, throw some rubber legs in back there, and that'll help throw a tail in on it. But the light bottom on that fly will help you a lot. Most overlooked fly on the whole stream, a midge. We'd be on that stream, and we're squatting gnats out of our face. We can't breathe from inhaling them. And we're trying to figure out what the hatch is, what's going on. Man, you just ate it. So, gnats and mosquitoes, those are big numbers in our midges. And those are easy on the dry flies. On our wet flies, they're almost nothing. It's just a little thread wrapped around the hook. If you've got the right shade of thread, it's going to work. Casting and presentation. Once you spent that time walking that stream, hiding behind boulders, staying in the shadows, you spot that fish that come up and took, or you spot that fish that's holding over here, or maybe you just seen your buddy catch a fish. Where are we going to cast? Where are we going to stand? What were the fish eating? Remember, target that biggest fish first and make the first cast count. Let's reverse this. Let's think about making our first cast count. Let's look and say, man, let's catch that big fish first. And then we go back and say, what was he eating? Do your best to imitate what you think it was. What it's saying, I like to stay behind their shoulders. If I'm on fish and I'm not catching them fishing behind their shoulders, I will move upstream. I'll go upstream and I'll quarter cast downstream, let it swing. Hopefully they followed it when they seen it swinging out and it rising just like a merger would in the water, okay? I've seen that fish down there. I know he's there, but he's not taken. So I'm hoping he picks up on the emerging fly that's going downstream. And then when he tails out downstream the fly, let it just tail out a second and start stripping it by. If you come by that fish the first time and a regular strip and he doesn't take it, that next cast you put it down there and you rip it back at the speed of light. He thinks something's getting away and he's going to be on, and before you know, he's running, your line's going sideways on the string. Sometimes you've got to let him think he can't have it. Our presentation, that fly ought to hit the water like it would in nature. Just allow it to contact the water in a natural manner as possible. I like to cast 2 or 3 feet above the water's surface and let the fly fall to the surface. You probably witnessed people out there casting, and they're beating the water with a line. We talked about telegraphing the fish lateral lines if we're waiting or pushing water above them. You're telegraphing the same thing if you're beating that water with a fly line. Let's work on casting above the surface and letting it go down in a natural manner. Soft hands. I don't mean, Rose back here is probably the person in the room with the softest hand, this young lady back here. But I don't mean the texture of your hands. I mean how you're handling the fish. This 5-year-old's on trout water and he's landing big fish, and other peoples are getting away that maybe they're former bass fishermen or whatever, but they're ripping that line through the lips, or they're handling too rough. They're trying to bring him to the net too quick. Take your time, make it work for you. Here's two gentlemen. They're bringing them fish in, and when the rods are bent, they've been out putting a great deal of pressure on them, so they're doing well. Then you get them there, grip that fish towards the tail, get a good grip on him, and lift him with your other hand. And if you decide you've stalked that fish, you've done everything you should. If you decide to take a photo, when you go to lift that fish out of the water, take a breath. Then lift that fish up to take a picture. If you need to breathe, that fish does. Put him back down in the water, let him breathe. Lift up and go for another try. A lot of times you'll see the front section or nose of that fish turn white after you've had him taking a photo. You've deprived him of the oxygen. If you get that white part of that forward part of that fish turning white or changing colors, let's get him in the water. Try to save that fish for the next trip. As I look at this and handling these fish with soft hands, the hook set has a lot to do with that. You guys can hook up a trout. You've stalked him. You've identified what the fish is eating. You know where you want to cast that fly. Now you've hooked up and you don't want to bust him off then. Take your time, move him over out of the feeding lane in case there's other fish there, okay? We want to save that feeding lane for another fish for us. Move him out of that. And as you maneuver him around the stream, soft hands. And of course, I'll remind you, you'll never break a rod with the rod pointed at the fish. But the next thing, if I'm working the water with you, bring him up there to the toes of my boots. Let's not go for a dip. However, if you say, Frank, I want a good picture, it's what I come for, we're probably going to get wet. I got to change the clothes in the car. Happened more than once. I said, enjoy the moment. Release the fish like we talked about before. He loses all that color on his nose. There again, the back of the fish is going to match the bottom of that stream somewhat, and the white of that mouth. Everybody here knows how to identify a bull from a female, right? Bull trout from a male fish from a female trout. Look at this long jaw on this fish. That's a male. If they've got a round, shorter jaw, and once you've looked at a couple, maybe I'll have one further on in here. And she's got a shorter jaw, and she's more rounded on the nose, where this is a pointed jaw. And many times, Chuck, I know you've seen it, this male fish with long jaw will have a bubble right out on the end of that low jaw. And that's good indication. The client that I have that enjoys himself the most on the stream, every time he catches one, we've got to stop and him have a cigar. I hope on most days that he runs out of cigars. But he enjoys a good cigar every time he catches good fish. like to meet you somewhere like this at the end of the day, and you just tell me about it. Tell me about your day. This young man here was fishing with me on a trout bout. Trout bout meaning that the evening before we'll get together and we'll have what some refer as a European dinner, where we have frog legs early in the afternoon. Dinner starts about 7, ends about 1 o'clock in the morning. I say, man, this is the longest dinner I ever been to. After dinner, they say, well, come in the next room, and they're drawing slots, they're placing bets, and a Calcutta type thing, where they're putting money on fish, okay? Well, they're just putting money on who's going to win and what's going to happen, this and that. And my first time on one of these Calcuttas, you know, it's paying probably $2,000 plus to get into the trout bout. But we get to the Calcutta, and they start saying, well, who's fishing with Frank? And they'll say, who's fishing with? Well, I'll put $900 on that. And somebody says, can I join in on that? And they'll put another chunk of money on it. And I'm sitting there, these fellas are crazy. You know, I'm not even fishing this day. All I'm doing is walking with the fella, helping him stalk trout. Well, this young man, I think he was 12 or 13 years old. We stalked trout, and he was showing me fish before the end of the day, okay? He caught some tremendous fish, and we kept documenting everything. But that was after a long morning where the trout bout started with expensive convertibles coming down the road with some really nice shotguns with fellows sitting on the back deck of these convertibles. It's the first time I'd ever been on a bird hunt out in the middle of the field in expensive convertibles. They're driving through, stalking these birds in side by side in convertibles. And I'm saying, man, what is this? But that's how they spent the morning before they come back. In the first few hours of the trout bout, you had to fish the traditional way. You're fishing with a bamboo rod with a flying line about the length of the rod with a leader on it, okay? I was surprised how many fish got caught. And then later in the day, they let you go and fish with these fly rods. Well, we went up to the house in the state towards the end of the day, and money was all being donated to Friends of the Smokies. You know, everybody just went into the Calcutta money. Everything's going to Friends of the Smokies. And, well, man, they doing a big favor for the Friends of the Smokies. First two come up, third and second place. They turn around and hand their check or their winnings to the people running things. I will donate this to Friends of the Smokies. This 12 or 13-year-old steps up there and they count out $4,000-something. He took it in his hand. And they said, what you going to do with it? I'm going to buy me a motorcycle. And he took that money deep in his pocket. His grandfather sitting there, and he nodded at me and the fellow that was running the thing. Granddaddy had it covered. He was taking care of it. He went and wrote a check for well above that, you know, after the ceremony was over. But this kid's going to buy him a motorcycle. If we're not rushed, I got a couple more on. Of course, we're Rainbow City Auction and Fly Shop. If you have questions later, feel free to come by and talk to me or dial me up on the phone. Some of the places that we might stay might be some really nice hotels, some really nice sheep wagons, but occasionally we'll end up in a barn somewhere. And wasn't a bad night out there. We was smoked out. We couldn't get back to the sheep wagon we were staying in. I forget the name of the forest fire that was out there that come in on the first day I was in Wyoming. Tammy back home was keeping up better than we were. We couldn't get good information, but we could call her. She'd tell us exactly what was going on, where the fire was, what direction it was moving. They was pricing us motels at over $400 a night. And all we're going to do is sleep and get a shower. Guess where we stayed? We stayed in an old barn on the side of a stream on some BLM property. I love small street and pocket waters. Fish from downstream, upstream, all the way across. But that big fish, everybody knows where he's laying. Right there where that plunge pool comes off and been coming off, beating that hole there for years, he's right there taking all those insects that come downstream. He's getting all that oxygen that's being created, and he's camouflaged because that white water over the top of him. If you fished all this downstream and you hadn't got a hold of something, cast to the pool just above it and let the water wash it off that pool into that hole. Be ready. It'll happen quick. I love these ledges under rocks. A lot of times you can fish these places and never get your feet wet. I mentioned earlier somebody getting right out in the prime area where the trout would be holding. Well, that's what my buddy's doing downstream. We got down there in the very water that the fish are holding in and run. He's standing right out in the middle of it and hadn't made a cast yet. You know, cast out there before you go. Some of the best dry fly fishing I've ever done is on some water like this. It's a little harder to get to at times, but it's real rewarding. Remember caddises, mayflies, pocket water. Remember I said netting, Frank netting? Well, this gentleman right here is the fellow that come out with that phrase, and he worked across town at the time at Goodyear. They heard about it at Goodyear, and somebody in the plant was evidently a good artist. They drew a cartoon of him with me standing on one side, looked like I was half his height. I'm looking over him at a trout up here in the trees, and they've got the caption, "Netting, Frank, netting." So we were both known by that for several years. Enjoy your friends and good fish. Occasionally you can share a comment with one of your friends, like this gentleman. I think he said, "Is that a good cast I made or what?" Well, that cast was fair to middling, but he got over and he commented about how good that cast was. We enjoyed the good waters, and remember the water buffalo. Be prepared, get your feet up, get your feet downstream, watch for the next shallow spot, and just lean over and put a hand down and stand up. This photo here is real important to me because if you get young people on the stream, share some time with them. I don't care if they want to skip rocks. Share time with them on that stream. They will become good fishermen. Rose, what you looking at there? What's on that screen? It's a flat rock on some trout water that you don't have to get your feet wet and go right out there. The way I understand, the way I interpret this trip, nobody else was catching fish. The guys had been down there said, "There ain't no fish down there." 11-year-old Rose goes down there, casts in that stream and got right in the seam, caught a real good fish right there, and she's wearing a T-shirt today that says "Fish Finder." She's our fish finder. Enjoy these fish. Be careful if you're going up and down these slick slides. And for guys, when you go on the trips, these wives and people we leave behind on the trip, they're real important from us making those trips. Remember that there's the reason we can get out on that stream. This is my wife Tammy in the photo. If you ever go by our shop, a lot of people go in and they say, "Where's Frank?" They think that I'm the only one that knows anything about them. If you're talking trout, you just passed the best source in the room. You know where we at, and I want to open up. We got a few minutes left. anybody got questions or comments, anything you'd like to add? Or, well, thank you, and I hope that bits and pieces, most of the fellows in this room probably knew 90% of what I'm talking about, but maybe they can glean something out of that other 10% that'll help you find fish or get on them when you go. Remember, that place is big as my hat in that rough water that's going down. That gives me a looking glass and a magnifying glass all in one where I can spot these fish. Watch your buddy. If he walks off from a fish, just grin and say, thank you, because he just give you the spot. That's all I have for you this afternoon. I run a few minutes longer than I expected, but if you would like to ask a few questions afterwards, I'm going to be here in the halls and out on the floor, and I'll be tickled to death to talk with any of you. Okay? Thanks for coming. And
All right, guys, that is going to do it for today. That's the last seminar for the evening. We'll be starting back up, I think, 11 o'clock tomorrow morning again. Seminars all day. 5 o'clock, the show ends. So doors open at 10. Get on down here. Take a look at the forecast. We'd love to have you. Come see us at the Bucks Island booth. But there's so much here. There is so much here. So if you did stop by and you're seeing this, please drop a comment on what your thoughts were. We'd love to know. Encourage folks to get on down here to the venue, to the Alabama Fishing Show and Expo. Yeah, this has been pretty cool. Great weekend. We'll see you tomorrow if you want some more seminars. Got some couple of new ones, I think, and some of the same stuff. So if you missed anything, we'll take the questions online if we need to. So, guys, y'all have a wonderful night. Be safe, and